Learn A. Micah 6:8. He hath showed thee, O man, what is good, and what doth the Lord require of thee, but to do justly, and to love mercy, and to walk humbly with thy God.
He is the first word, so a large H is placed by the 6 for chapter 6, that is drawn into a cloud for He, which is God, with the royal blue 8 for verse 8 made into eyes to represent hath showed. To remember, this verse begins with He hath showed. The O man is illustrated with the man having a 6 around his head to correlate that man was made on day 6. The bottom of the 6 makes an O shape that you can think of for O, and the man again for man. What is good, you can think of the man making a W shape with his arms for the W in what. You can think that the word good has 2 circles in the middle of the letters, making a royal blue 8 for verse 8. The 8 is also made into 2 clouds to represent God, that you can think of the phrase, God is good all the time, and all the time God is good. And what doth the Lord require of thee? Is the Micah icon for Lord, with Jesus being in it, and all the things on the right made out of 6s and royal blue 8s are the requirements that the Lord requires, and the man again on the left represents of thee. You can also think of the man making a W shape with his arms for the W in what is good, and the W in what doth the Lord require of thee. But to do justly is the 6 made into a gavel, because judges are associated with using gavels, with the handle of the gavel for do, because we do things with our hands, and this is where our hands hold a gavel, and the part of the gavel in the bottom of the 6 you can think of for justly. And to love mercy is a royal blue 8 made with the top heart in it for love and the bottom heart for mercy. And to walk humbly is the man again with the 6 around his head for man created on day 6, walking. And you can also think of the man making a W shape with his arms for the W in walk and walking, on the grass with no paved road, for humbly. With thy God, you can also think of the man making a W shape with his arms for the W in with, and his hand holding on to the royal blue 8 made into 2 clouds to represent Jesus on the bottom and the Father on the top, because if you have the Son, you have the Father also.
And it goes together like this. Micah 6:8. He hath showed thee, O man, what is good, and what doth the Lord require of thee, but to do justly, and to love mercy, and to walk humbly with thy God. Micah 6:8. He hath showed thee, O man, what is good, and what doth the Lord require of thee, but to do justly, and to love mercy, and to walk humbly with thy God. Micah 6:8. He hath showed thee, O man, what is good, and what doth the Lord require of thee, but to do justly, and to love mercy, and to walk humbly with thy God. Micah 6:8. Next, Matthew 5:7. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy.
Blessed is the first word, so a large B is placed by Jesus made into a 5 for chapter 5, saying the Sermon on the Mount, and the 5 made into a man's head, with God's arm coming down from heaven on his head, blessing him. To remember, this verse begins with blessed. Are the merciful is the royal blue 7 for verse 7, made with a heart filling up the 7, so that it is full of mercy, for merciful. for they shall obtain mercy, is the man made out of a royal blue 7 for they, with his hand out obtaining the heart, made in the bottom of another 5 for chapter 5, with the top of the 5 made into an arrow pointing down to the heart, for shall obtain mercy.
And it goes together like this. Matthew 5:7. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy. Matthew 5:7. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy. Matthew 5:7. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy. Matthew 5:7. Next, Matthew 5:44. Love your enemies.
Love is the first word, so a large L is placed by Jesus again, saying the Sermon on the Mount, and the 5 for chapter 5 is made with the top part pointing down to the heart at the bottom of it to represent love. To remember, this verse begins with love. Your is the man on the left side of the first royal blue 4 for verse 44, giving a flower to the man with a sword on the right that is his enemy, for loving this enemy man. Your is also the man on the right of the other royal blue 4, who is also having an enemy with the person's arm holding a club made out of the left side of the 4. You can think this is like Cain and Abel in Genesis chapter 4 also, who just loved Cain and did not fight back. So enemies is one enemy holding a sword in his hand and the other enemy holding the club.
And it goes together like this. Matthew 5:44. Love your enemies. Matthew 5:44. Love your enemies. Matthew 5:44. Love your enemies. Matthew 5:44. Next, Matthew 22:37. Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, and with all thy soul, and with all thy mind.
Thou is the first word, so a large T is placed by the top of the 22 for chapter 22, made into the 10 Commandment stones, to think that the 10 Commandments start with thou shalt. The middle of the 22 is made into men, so the first man you can think of is for thou also. Love is the bottom of the 22 made into hearts, and there are 2 that you can think are for the 2 parts of the phrase love the Lord and thy God. Lord, you can think, is the Matthew icon crown for a king, or Lord. Thy is the second man, and God is the cloud, because we think of God as up in the sky, past the clouds. With all thy heart is the royal blue 3 drawn into a heart, and with all thy soul is the royal blue 7 made into a man, and with all thy mind is the man pointing to his mind.
And it goes together like this. Matthew 22:37. Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, and with all thy soul, and with all thy mind. Matthew 22:37. Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, and with all thy soul, and with all thy mind. Matthew 22:37. Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, and with all thy soul, and with all thy mind. Matthew 22:37. Next, John 13:35. By this shall all men know that ye are my disciples, if ye have love one to another.
By is the first word, so a large B is placed by the arrow that is in a 1 shape for the 1 in chapter 13, and to also represent the T shape in this, which is pointing down to the 5 in a parentheses of the love one to another, which is what by this is. To remember, this verse begins with by this. Shall all men know is illustrated with the John icon for all the men in the world, with the 3 for the 3 in chapter 13 made into 2 men's heads for men, with arrows pointing to their minds to represent the men knowing. That ye are my disciples is the man on the bottom of the royal blue 3 for the 3 in verse 35, for ye. The arrow pointing up to the face of the man in the top of the royal blue 3 represents Jesus, for my, and the man in the bottom of the 3 to also represent disciples. If ye have love one to another is the disciple again at the bottom of the royal blue 3, and have love is illustrated with the heart in the bottom of the royal blue 5, for the 5 in verse 35 to represent love, and one to another is the 2 men in the top of the royal blue 5 drawn with their arms outstretched to represent them loving each other and giving things to each other.
And it goes together like this.
John 13:35.
By this shall all men know that ye are my disciples, if ye have love one to another.
John 13:35.
By this shall all men know that ye are my disciples, if ye have love one to another.
John 13:35.
By this shall all men know that ye are my disciples, if ye have love one to another.
John 13:35.
Next.
Romans 8:28. All things work together for good to them that love God.
All is the first word, so an A is placed by the 8 for chapter 8, with the top made into a bag of things and the bottom made into a bowl of fruit and jewels to also represent things. To remember, this verse begins with all things. Work together for good is illustrated with a royal blue 2 for the 2 in verse 28 made into hands for work, because we work with our hands, and the 8 made into 2 clouds that you can think represent God being good, and the 2 clouds are going together to think of together for good. To them is another 8 made with 2 faces in it, and 2 more faces made in another royal blue 2. That is the bottom of the royal blue 2 that is pointing over to the heart made in the bottom of another royal blue 8 for love. And God is the top of the royal blue 8 made into a cloud.
And it goes together like this.
Romans 8:28. All things work together for good to them that love God. Romans 8:28. All things work together for good to them that love God. Romans 8:28. All things work together for good to them that love God. Romans 8:28. Magnificent.